Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Superfluous, the episode where we try to figure out why we're not good at bar trivia, not as good at bar trivia as we thought we were. Really nailed that intro. Sam is not here today. We're having another guest on this one. The last guest episode, Dr. Brandon, he was talking about wine. I decided to have another doctor on, and I just wanted to have her introduce herself. Dr. Alex, good afternoon.
Hello. Should I just introduce?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't want to say. I figure you'll say like what you studied,
Gotcha.
how you got into the topic.
Yeah. My name is Dr. Alexander Lowe McAdams, but everybody just calls me Alex.
Mm-hmm.
I have a PhD in literary studies with an emphasis in the history of astronomy and philosophical thought with respect to religion and Protestantism and Catholicism in the early modern era, which I know is a mouthful. It's a very specific topic.
Yeah, I'm looking at her thesis book, and it's a large book. It's definitely lots of work, it looks like.
Yeah, it's about 2 inches thick.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Like embossed and leather. It is super nice.
I have many leather-bound books.
Kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
And so I guess the topic you want to talk about from what I hear is Anima Mundi. Mm-hmm. And my first thought, I'm like, okay, Mundi means world, and anima is like animated, like it's alive. Mm-hmm. I'm like, oh, it's having never heard about it, knowing nothing about it, I was like, oh, it's kind of like the world tree, like in Norse mythology, how everything is related and all the realms are related. Mm-hmm. And then I did a little more research, pretty much just like went to Wikipedia for the most part, and it turns out I was totally wrong for the first. Like, I did not want to keep going down that.
Imagine how it felt writing that document.
And so before I, butcher what, I think it is, if you were to explain this concept of Anima Mundi, like, the subreddit Explain It Like I'm 5. So
right.
how would you explain that as if I were 5?
Yeah, so the Anima Mundi literally means the spirit of the world. Anima we get from anima is the Latin word for spirit, which is what we sort of get the word animated from, not sort of, we absolutely get the word animated from anima. And it's the idea that there is some hidden principle that is, to the ancients and to some extent, I think for modern astrophysicists, is unmeasurable, that keeps life going in the universe, right? It's related to questions of why are there beings instead of nothing? Like why is the universe not, entropy or inertia? Like why does it always bend toward life, right? Or like particles, combining together to make new things out of the particulate matter. So it has very different nuances across different cultures and philosophical thought. But what I studied in particular is how, the late antique and then medieval and early modern and or Renaissance figures understood the Anima Mundi as philosophical thought with respect to their religion, which was Catholicism and or Protestantism. And it turns out to be a really crazy amalgamation of, can you theologically say that this thing that moves through the universe is God? Because if you do, how is that different from the pagans, right? Mm-hmm. The Romans believed, has set up their system that there were like river gods and the god of the ocean and the god of the sun. Like all of these concepts of polytheism were supposed to be so separate from a monotheistic religion. And then a man like Giordano Bruno comes along and says, wait a second, what if the Anima Mundi is just the Holy Spirit? Okay. And then theologians, bishops and whatnot, their heads exploded.
I was about to say that phrase, their head exploded.
Yeah. They were like, no, we can't do that because we're different. Mm-hmm. And thus started one of the craziest times in the cosmological revolution.
Yeah, because I saw the article you sent me about Giordano Bruno, and I guess because I had never heard of him, that him and, Copernicus? I'm just looking at my notes. Yeah, they were, I guess, around at the same time. I don't know if they, knew each other, but were they, and I think one of the things the article said is that Copernicus didn't didn't finish the thought about like, okay, the Earth is not the center of the universe, but here's the math why. But Copernicus didn't really go into, I guess, like you were saying, the theology and religion of what does it mean that the Earth isn't the center of the universe.
Yeah, exactly. So before getting into Copernicus, Giordano Bruno, for those playing the home game, was a Dominican friar, very smart, exceptionally talented, and the Dominicans were known sort of traditionally, historically, for getting into those questions of those deep questions of origin and natural philosophy, which is what we now call science, and its relationship to God.
And Franciscans, that was like the other.
That was the other sect,
one.
yeah. And Franciscans, as far as I know, I mean, I'm going to say don't quote me on this, but I'm on a podcast. So, Franciscans, as far as I know, were much more invested in like hardcore theology. Like, how do we sort of calculate the amount of angels that can dance on the head of a pin? Like that's like, as far as I understand, traditional Franciscan, methods of theology. So Bruno was this like savant. He was a genius, like one of these network thinkers that, you can imagine like a cork board with like, the Charlie Day, like Pepe Sylvia. Yeah, yes, he was definitely a Pepe Sylvia type. Ended up leaving the cloth, was actually kicked out. That's another story.
It's another episode.
Yeah. And then started wandering around Europe, trying to get, jobs and stuff, writing and editing and teaching so that he could purvey and what's the word? I guess just come up with these ideas, like what's the word? Develop his ideas, his philosophical ideas into books, and that sort of thing. So this was in the late 16th century, so the late 1500s. Yeah. Copernicus died in 1543. So there's a gap in time between when Copernicus sort of like stops the world with his book, and Bruno comes along. So Copernicus's big thing was obviously the Earth is not the center of the universe. At the time, it was not controversial. It was actually dedicated to the Pope at the time. It was funded, as far as I know, by the Catholic Church, and it wasn't until Giordano Bruno came along and then Galileo that Copernicanism became such a flashpoint and like incendiary theory. So when we think of Copernicanism, church heresy and all that sort of stuff, it really doesn't get started until this guy that we don't really know anything about, other than, freaks like me who write very long texts about him. So Copernicus really started it off, and he in his intro, he talks about, in his introduction to his mathematical theory, or theorems, talks about Pythagoreanism and the idea of a spirit moving through the universe, what the Pythagoreans would have called the Anima Mundi. And Bruno was like, wait a second, hold up. And then that's how he got started.
So the Pythagoreans sort of named it, and then Giordano sort of rolled with it.
Yeah, there's also a long, complicated history with Pythagoreanism as like being able to nail it down. Historians like Dilwyn Knox, who wrote the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on Giordano Bruno, has done some really great work trying to untangle what is actually Pythagorean and what is just like a jumble mismatch of other pre-Socratic philosophical history. So we're fairly certain that the guy Pythagoras, if he existed, didn't come up with the Pythagorean theorem, but here we are.
Yeah.
But one of the tenets of Pythagoreanism is the idea that the sun is the central life giver of the universe, their universe here on the planet. So, which makes sense. I mean, it makes sure that plants grow and stuff.
Yeah.
stuff. So they were onto something, right? And it was this idea that something as far away as the sun could suffuse life on the planet that was so central to daily life and reproduction and that sort of thing. So that's where Pythagoreanism sort of locks into this question.
Okay.
But it's also, they also take quite a bit of, they meaning these philosophers that Giordano Bruno is sort of lumped in together with, take these ideas from Platonism too. So Plato's Timaeus, for example.
Yeah, that came a lot when I was looking.
Yeah, it talks a lot about the world soul.
Like it was written by Plato, but it was it was supposed to be someone else talking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like a dialogue.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I actually think like the translations from like, like Oxford World Classics or whatever, make it, to me, really, I think they're really accessible in ways that like articles like this are not. And you can really see how Giordano Bruno was like poring over these central texts to really understand what the ancients were saying. Because in this time, the wisdom of the ancients was all they had in terms of understanding the universe, right? So it was also during this time of massive rediscovery is the wrong word, but it's what everybody uses. Rediscovery of ancient texts and these monastic libraries. The idea of rediscovering Lucretius or Virgil or Ovid, and copying those original manuscripts and being able, because of the printing press, to disseminate them across the continent, right? So it's this insanely productive time for intellectual thought, and there's a lot of borrowing and a lot of getting stuff wrong based on previous assumptions. But so much of what we know about the classical world, the ancient world, is due to people like Bruno, who really studied that stuff and made sure that it was proliferated throughout his contemporary consciousness. Mm-hmm. I know that's a lot. Maybe I'm a little Pepe Silva too.
I think one of the things the article that I think I also read that article, and then at least from someone who didn't study it, it was definitely very very dense.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I picked up on, and it helped because there was a diagram of there's the soul, and there's like universal soul and universal matter. And I think what I guess either the author or Bruno or both are trying to say, like, you need both of them.
Correct.
That like the soul is what binds it together, but matter is, what the physical properties of it. Hopefully I'm not like butchering.
No, that's right.
And it just, I guess, having never heard of this person, Giordano Bruno, it just seems like such an important thing that wasn't ever brought up.
Yes. Yeah. So this is actually, as far as I know, maybe Dr. Brandon can let us know. These are still discussions that like high-level scientists are still having. Like, is matter alive or dead? We still, as far as I know, haven't really reached a consensus. If you put two material particles together and just let them sit, are they going to create something new, or is there another sort of entity that creates life out of them, right? That's the central question of these sort of very complex articles is the stuff, that like this table is made out of, is it alive in some way? Sentient, maybe not in the way we are sentient, but sentient in the way that, it can combine with another particle to make something new, right? And also central to all of this is the question of what is life? What is considered alive and dead? So there were two camps, probably still are two camps, I would imagine, in the history of philosophy, especially during this period, is mechanism versus animism. And mechanism is very much the Descartes, I think, therefore I am. The animals are just, machines, and we are elevated.
So I guess that means if you don't think, then you're not am.
Correct. Yeah. So it's this idea that like the hierarchy of man, right? Man, animal, like animal, vegetable, mineral.
Yeah, that was in one of the diagrams.
Yeah. You're doing great. You really are. This is really dense stuff. So the fact that you were able to pick this up and talk about it is
cool. If it's pictures, I'm all for it.
I'm mostly speaking pictures and symbols too, so it works. So the mechanism is the idea that all atoms are dead. So the concept of atomism we think of like in astrophysics, very contemporary conversation, but it's actually millennia old. The Epicureans were the first to, or Democritus really, way pre-Socratic, was one of the first thinkers to say that the world is made up of small particles. And atom comes from the Greek atomos, which means undivisible, which we now know we can divide atoms, but that concept is really old. And one of the major thinkers who was rediscovered during this early modern period, when Bruno was up and coming, so to speak, was Lucretius, who said all atoms are dead. You need atoms to create the universe. He basically sort of discovers is the wrong word, but pre-theorizes the Big Bang in his poetry, which is really cool. If you're a nerd like me, that's really cool. And then the other side said, this is the camp that Bruno was in, is like, no, not everything is not dead other than us. Like you can look at the planet and see that things are alive. They may not be alive in the way we are, but they are alive. So it's this divide in ontology, right? Of like what exists for the purpose of life and what is dead. And animism, as opposed to mechanism, says everything is alive, which is why there is the matter, the stuff, right? And the spirit that moves through it and breathes life into it. Okay. So another version of the Anima Mundi, or another name for the Anima Mundi, is the Spiritus Mundi, the breath of the world. So they're used pretty interchangeably, but it's this idea that that matter has to be suffused or injected with something magical, right, to make it alive.
So was mechanism and animism, I think you said mechanism was pre-Socratic, so it's older, right?
They're both pre-Socratic ideas, but by the time of the late 16th and early 17th centuries, these were the two camps that really were like going head to head with each other. And to some extent, I mean, mechanism won out in the long run, right? Because it's this idea of, like humans are masters of the universe, and therefore we can treat the earth and animal as like subjects, right? We have to dominate it, is the idea there. But of course, like with modern environmental movements, and the more we find out about like how plants communicate or like fungi communicate and stuff, that idea is probably very reductive. So like modern eco-criticism, environmental movements, to some extent, like really thoughtful science, I would say, maybe Dr. Brandon can agree or disagree, is really questioning man's place in this supposed hierarchy, right? I would argue that there is no hierarchy. We just like to pretend there is, but that's, another podcast. Yeah, is that helpful? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I wanted to first throw it back a little bit to whatever that Plato thing was called. It starts with the T.
Timaeus.
And so I guess what Wikipedia said is that in Timaeus, Plato, or Timaeus, who's the same person in this case, mentions the demiurge, which from what I can tell is like it created the world, or it's like what gives everything the connection that makes Anima Mundi work. I don't know if that's like the right, idea of it. Reading that, it just made me think of like all the modern Christianity that says like, oh, God created the universe.
Right.
And so I don't know if that's connection is right, or Plato was just spitballing, and I could be wrong about what Plato might be thinking.
That seems right. I had completely forgotten, again, for those playing the home game, completely forgotten that the demiurge was a thing. So thank you for bringing that up. I'm just looking at it right now, again, on Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. That it's the handiwork of a divine craftsman, the demiurge, who imitating an unchanging and eternal model, imposes mathematical order on a pre-existent chaos to generate the ordered universe or the cosmos. Yes, absolutely. And it's during this time that the new science, this is what, astronomy, mathematics, natural philosophy really became known as in this era. The new science really started taking mathematics seriously. And that is because you had lots of trade with the Moors in the Middle East, in the Levant region. The Arabs were ahead of us Westerners quite a bit.
A lot of things.
In a lot of things. They were...
Numbers.
Arabic numerals.
Yeah.
They were calculating stuff that the Europeans were just like waking up to in the 15th century. They had been calculating since the 6th century. So a lot of this was known, like all the brown people in the Levant region were like, duh.
Yeah.
But the white guy likes to pretend that he's the first to do it.
Yeah.
So, and it's also during this period, this massive amount of trade and exchange with the Middle East and the Far East, learning mathematics and incorporating it into everyday life, especially university life, that mathematics, especially those figures like Galileo and Kepler and Copernicus, viewed mathematics as the language of God. It was a divine language.
It sounds familiar, I think.
Yeah.
I may have heard that.
So they really think of, mathematics as studying theology, which is where you get this really cool, commingling of theology, science, math. I get like goosebumps thinking about it, honestly, because
like they were religious and they thought what the church said was true, but then at the same time, I guess what I'm thinking is that they're doing all this math and it's not seeing what the church is saying.
Right.
And so they're out saying the math is right, or they're out saying, no, the church is right.
Right.
It's just, what do you do when the church is wrong, especially like in that part of history when the church was super important.
So Galileo was smart and was like, fine, I recant. And then, the super apocryphal thing was like, but it moves, that he whispers under his breath. But I do want to point out that Copernicus, the De Revolutionibus Orbium Coelestium, was published in 1543. It was the same year that Copernicus died. Another story is that it was presented to him on his deathbed, but it wasn't banned by the church until 1616. And there's a reason for that. It's because people like Bruno, come hell or high water, was saying all religions and Christianity are reaching toward the same purpose. Like they're syncretized. And the church was like, no, they're not. Which is like a very progressive way of thinking, especially during the time of like the Inquisition. And it's really Bruno, he's thinking philosophically and theologically about these things at the same time. Kepler and Galileo are poring over Copernicus's ideas and really trying to develop that thought. The two are working in tandem, and it's those two working in tandem that becomes a big problem for the church. It's not the mathematics that's the problem. It's using the Bible to create unorthodox readings to think about these things. So another thing that like locks into this debate that is often overlooked is the Counter-Reformation. So we know of the Protestant Reformation, right? Where Martin
Nails
Luther, But the Counter-Reformation was about.
Does that mean that? I guess the Counter-Reformation would be, no, the church is great.
Right. And it was about 15, 20 years later, like the Council of Trent meets over a series of years and then decides we're losing power and members. Because at this time, regardless of what your religious beliefs are, even if you are, Catholic, you have to contend with the fact that in this era, they owned everything in Europe, right? This was not just about, God in the sky and hell below, right? This was also about land. It was about control.
Yeah. Like if you ever got excommunicated, you're screwed.
You're done. Yeah. In both this life and the next one. So they had to really contend with the fact that they were losing both political and sort of, real estate power to the Protestants. So the Counter-Reformation is them digging their heels in and saying, this is how you interpret the Bible. This is the Orthodox reading. Anybody who uses the Bible and claims to be a Catholic and reads the Bible differently than what we say it is, we're going to have a problem.
Okay.
And that's how Galileo ends up getting in trouble, as well as Bruno. So again, it's not just about like the science, right? It's not just about like math. It is all of these questions that we're still contending with today about who has the authority to say what's true, what's not true, who do we trust? It's one of the I think what attracts me to this field is so much about our modern moment. I shouldn't say modern, our contemporary moment of, the internet getting out of control and like people publishing whatever they want with very little oversight is so similar to the moment we're living in now with the internet and fake news and, political powers trying to say, nope, you can't think that. And then rebels, down below are like, yeah, we can do whatever we want. It's very similar, for better or for worse. I'm not going to get into that, but the idea that the powers that be get to dictate what the individual believes is still very much a part of our life, and we're still troubled with these questions. We like to think that because we're in the 21st century that we've got it all figured out because we're modern, but we're not modern.
Yeah, I was going to say in a lot of ways. Yeah.
We just changed the method of communication.
So on the page of Anima Mundi, there was like a super, super tiny blurb about the Jewish idea of Anima Mundi.
Oh.
And it was like 3 or 4 sentences. And I don't know how, like Wikipedia is saying that basically the idea is you need to be like a really good Jewish person, like a tzaddik is what it's called, to know this to like not know this connection, but like to see the connection, like visually see it.
Yeah, that's really interesting too. And
it's very like Kabbalah.
Yes. Yeah.
It's like Kabbalah Kabbalah's most like 90+% of the time is interesting. It thinks really well. And then once you start adding gematria in, which is like every Hebrew letter has a number, and then those numbers add up to something, and that something, it means this. At least, my opinion, gematria is a little out there. But the idea of Kabbalah and being able to see, my takeaway was like seeing the connection, like with your like physically seeing. Yeah. Kind of like,
absolutely. So I tried to really dig into early modern Kabbalah in my project, and I was like, I don't read Hebrew. I cannot learn another language because I really need to get the fuck out of this institution and graduate.
Yeah.
But it really is a very verdant, I guess you could say, field of study to really think about. Again, this is from the Levant region, like how the Europeans were cribbing a lot of stuff that for the Jews and Arabs were just everyday knowledge, right? That was just a part of their lives. So Kabbalah, I think you would probably have a better understanding than I do. I barely know what it is, even though I've read a few books about it academically. Kabbalah was very much so the sort of inspiration for Bruno's thought, right? The idea that there is an enlightened individual, and through the right reading and the right understanding of both words and numbers. So again, literature and mathematics, if you could just study it enough, and if you could understand it enough, you can unlock the secrets of the universe. And that's also related to Hermeticism, like the idea of alchemy and being able to transform matter into gold. It's not just like this woo-woo, scientific theory of like these idiots thought that they could really turn iron into gold. It was like, no, we're trying to understand how one matter turns into other matter, and if we can just harness that, we could be closer to God.
Right.
And alchemy turned into chemistry. Yeah. Most of what we know about rudimentary chemistry is thanks to the alchemists.
Yeah, I mean that's all I have. That's all. I think 20 to 30. Yeah, we're 30 minutes in, and I think and like there's multiple books that you've shown me about Anima Mundi and about Alex just showed me that Dr. Alex just showed me a book just about Giordano Bruno and Galileo and what her topic, what she talked about, and I think I was telling this earlier. I think the guy who wrote this book, I also had a class at UT because the author of this book, Alberto Martinez, I guess maybe Dr. Alberto Martinez. I took a history of science course, and it was at UT, and this author also teaches that. So I'm making a conclusion that I think I had this professor. So yeah, I mean, there are tons of books. It's only been 30 minutes. I'm sure you could write 300 something pages.
Let's see. Hold on. So we've got some prequel information with my acknowledgments and whatnot. And then I've got like a 10-page timeline that goes from the pre-Socratics to, I don't know, 1670. No big deal. Let's see, with the bibliography, and this is after massive cutting that I did in the revision stage. With the bibliography, it is 305 pages. Yeah. And there was one thing that I just wanted to say about Bruno that maybe we can maybe we can put towards the front because it really is batshit.
Yeah.
So he was most of his works he published in London, which is really interesting because he was an Italian, and the English then, not making any comments about now, the English then were very xenophobic, especially toward Italians because Italians were Catholic, right? And there was this idea.
I guess at this point they were already Church of England.
Yes, very much so.
Anglican.
Yes, yeah. Anglican, Catholic light. But they also have this idea that, like if you were born and raised in a hot climate, then you were like hot tempered and Lothario and like sexual and kind of whatever. Not great stuff. So Bruno was in London, published all this stuff, got a ton of, hate and flack. Some of it was probably earned because he would, go lecture at Oxford, the real Oxford, and call the theologians and professors pigs for not, agreeing with him. But also there was a lot of xenophobia because he was an Italian and a lapsed Catholic, and this crazy person, like wandering around Europe like an ascetic, prophet or whatever. So he finally gets run out of London, and he stops around Germany and hangs out for a bit because the Protestant, Northern Europe, the Protestant, land was a lot less hostile, right? He ends up getting coaxed back to Venice. That is not a good decision for him because the person he ends up studying with, tutoring, all that sort of thing, turns him into the Venetian Inquisition. The Venetian Inquisition, there's a lot. This Alberto Martinez's book, Burned Alive, really goes into the the nitty gritty of what charges were brought against him. For the most part, if I recall correctly, the Venetian Inquisition sort of dropped the charges or slap on the wrist or whatever. But Bruno had pissed off a lot of people in Rome. And when word got to Rome that Bruno was back in Italy and being questioned by the Venetian Inquisition, it was pretty much all over for him. So they transported him to Rome for the Roman Inquisition, because there were various pockets of Inquisitions at the time. There's not just the Inquisition, right?
Or the Spanish Inquisition.
Yeah,
that's the
nobody forgets the Spanish Inquisition. Yes,
I didn't want to make that joke.
But people do forget about the Venetian Inquisition. So he comes to Rome, and this is in 1591 or so, and he dies in 1600. Comes to Rome. They have all these charges leveled against him. The ones that are false, that he does not believe in, he outright says, I never said that. You're misunderstanding. This is what I believe. This is what I've written, so and so. The one thing that they cannot abide is the Anima Mundi. Okay. And he refuses to recant it. He says, this is real. This is fact. You can't say that there's a Holy Spirit and not really understand how that fits into our natural world. He quotes the Bible, which we know is, in this era, if it's against what the church says, a different interpretation. He quotes the Bible to essentially validate his ideas, his thought. He's using humanistic research, what we think of as citing your sources. He's citing his sources. The problem is that the Catholic Church doesn't like the sources that he's using because they think they're the ones who should have the final say of what those sources mean. He quotes the Bible, says it's here in the ancient text, in the, in the traditional Hebrew, Jewish, thought, like this is what the Bible says. You can't convince me otherwise, and I'm not going to say that I was wrong. This happens for about 9 years. They torture him mercilessly, like really, really brutal stuff. Just look up for those playing the home game, 16th century, Catholic torture, not fun stuff. Right. They essentially beg him to recant because they don't want this mess on their hands, right? Like, having to publicly punish someone just for their thought. It's not a good look, right? Mm-hmm. He refuses to do it. So they decide, all right, we're gonna have to, assassinate you. We're gonna have to kill you because you're not playing by the rules. So on Ash Wednesday, 1600, he wakes up in his jail cell in Rome, walks the 1.5 miles to Campo di Fiori, which is Italian for field of flowers. It's like it was like a market, and I think there was horse trading and stuff there. They had set up a pyre, essentially. They strip him naked, hang him upside down, put a vice in his mouth to keep him from speaking, and burn him alive.
Oh, wow.
They burn him alive.
Mm-hmm. And especially upside down.
Yes, so there's a reason behind that. Because smoke rises. So if the smoke rises and you inhale it, you pass out and you don't feel the torture of the burning. Okay. They specifically wanted him to feel it burned as he was, leaving this world. They wanted him to they didn't want him to pass out. And at the very moment, right before they light the pyre, the apocryphal story goes, one of the inquisitors holds up a crucifix to his face and tells him it's his last moment to recant, and he turns his face away.
Ooh.
Yeah. So it was a spectacle. And this is Ash Wednesday, and this man is being burned alive in a public square. Like, people are going and getting, their blessing. Yeah. At the church on Easter Sunday or Ash Wednesday, like right before Easter, right?
Is Ash Wednesday the Wednesday before Easter?
I believe so. Is that right? Yeah. I don't remember a lot of this stuff from childhood. I don't know.
Yeah, the morning before the resurrection.
Yeah. So they get there. This is beautifully symbolic, right? I mean, it's horrific, but they, Catholics in Rome are going to get, the ash crosses on their forehead at the same time that this heretic is being burned at the stake. After he's dead, they do not bury him. They throw his remains in the Tiber River because they don't want followers. This is sounding a lot like Jesus. I'm not going to lie. And that's it for Bruno. Mm-hmm. The problem is that once you have the spectacle of killing somebody so brutally in such a public fashion, it's like the Streisand effect times a million.
Right.
Everybody wants to know, what was the big deal with this guy? And then you get people like Kepler and Galileo and other figures who are also keyed into the Copernican revolution, the conversation. And then they're like, this guy had some points. Like, he was
might be onto something.
Yeah, he was a little nuts. And but really smart people usually are. Mm-hmm. But we can use this, and they did use it. And there's evidence to suggest in Martinez's book, Burned Alive, that a fair amount of philosophical and scientific thought were cleverly carrying the ideas that Bruno espoused, underground to keep this idea alive, to really discover what our solar system looks like, and how the planets move and why they move, and are the stars fixed, or are they also mobile? Are we mobile, right, in this universe? And Martinez surmises in his book that the reason Galileo got off fairly easy is because they couldn't afford another Bruno situation. Mm-hmm. Because Galileo also had the mathematics to back it up. instead of just, being this like wild, crazy guy, just running around Europe in his friar outfit. And I buy Martinez's argument. He makes a really good case that without Bruno and sort of Galileo and Kepler keeping up these ideas, scientific thought would not be where it is today. And all of that is due to the Anima Mundi.
Cool.
What stands today in Campo Fiore?
Oh, yes. Okay, so Dr. Brandon reminded me, my favorite part about this whole story is if you go to Rome today in Campo dei Fiori, there is a massive statue of a frocked,
Yeah, the cover of this burned alive book by Martinez is a statue of Bruno.
Yeah, is a frocked man, very moodily looking, like his head is down, but he's looking up, right? So it's like this look of complete, like disgust in a way. Like it's a moody statue in the middle of this otherwise beautiful, like, square palazzo, piazza, in Rome, filled with like tourist shops and restaurants and bars and that sort of thing. It's about, 15, 20 feet.
20 feet.
20 feet. It's him holding a book and he's looking out, and the statue was placed so that he is staring down the Vatican.
Oh, cool.
And it's tall enough, I want to say, that the eyes can see the Dome of St. Peter's. And it stands on the very spot where Bruno was burned alive, because we don't have his body.
Yeah. So is the statue very tall? Like how?
Yeah, it's huge. Okay. It's like, it's imposing. It's kind of spooky, especially if you go at night. It's just like this really, because it's like bronze, right? And like heavy, right? And it like captures like the flow of his frock really well. And he's like hooded in the image. And every February, on the anniversary of his death, I want to say the mayor of Rome, alongside various free thinker groups like the Masons and atheist groups, put a large commemorative laurel at the statue to honor the absolute hell, the inferno that free thinkers often get from institutions of power. And I just think that's really compelling. So that's Bruno and the Anima Mundi.
I guess usually how we end here is we just plug whatever, like restaurants, TV shows, bars. Dr. Brandon did plug How to Survive Atlantic Sea, the East End wine bar. And so he said that you're not allowed, you have to plug something else.
Sure, absolutely. I'm happy to do that, especially since all of our friends work in food and beverage. They could benefit from everybody knowing about these spots so they can make more money. Let's see.
Yeah. Grand prize is a 2-minute walk from here.
That's true. 6s and 7s, I would say, is my favorite. Although it recently apparently went viral on TikTok. So you've got a bunch of obnoxious people just wanting neon drinks to get like a photo with it, not even knowing what's in the cocktail. But it's some of the, it's a really unpretentious spot. It's fun, but the cocktails are very high level. A talented group of people put them together, and they also serve Jell-O shots.
Oh, nice.
That one, and then I would like to plug Vinyl Edge.
The record store in the Heights.
Record store in the Heights. We spend probably too much money there, but it has been a really nice sort of hobby that we've gotten into, especially during the pandemic.
Record collecting?
Record collecting, just going in and browsing.
Have there been like particular records, like rare records or other records that like you really want, and then Vinyl Edge has those? Yes.
On Record Store Day, the line is wrapped like around the block twice for special releases. I think this last one we got, this last Record Store Day, we got a special edition Opeth, is that right? Which is my favorite band, a death metal band.
You can request and order stuff. Like they're very low key responsive.
Yeah. Facebook message. They'll answer. They're super chill, locally owned, pro-vaccine, pro-mask. I love them. Yeah. And then, oh, sorry, go
Yeah,
ahead.
and then East End Barber. That's next to a board game bar in here in town, Coral Sword. I've been to Coral Sword a bunch of times. Never been to East End Barber, but I started like looking into other barbershops instead of like Great Clips or Supercuts or something like that. I went to Argyle League on Alabama, and that was really cool. And then I decided to try East End Barber, and I had like a haircut and a beard trim and everything, and I've gotten someone important to me likes it a lot, and so I think I might go back in a couple months to do that again. And I'd never been before, and the service was great. The conversation was great. It's definitely has East End vibes, very alternative.
I love
and
the
it's
East End.
it's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I wanted to thank you, Dr. Alex, for coming and talking. Definitely one of the more like highbrow educational episodes that of the podcast. Usually we end up talking about like just random TV shows, or just talk about like weird Texas things. But it's good to have like another doctor on to talk about important like history of science topics that if it didn't happen, then we'd still be thinking way differently than we would now.
Yeah, thank you for having me. You can follow me on Twitter, McAdams PhD.
Very
That's
cool.
M as in mouse, C as in cat, A as in apple, D as in dog, A as in apple, M as in mouse, S as in Steve, PhD, because
You are a doctor.
I am a doctor, and it took so long to earn it that I shout it from the rooftops. McAdams PhD at Twitter. DMs are open. Just don't send me hate or gross stuff.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Thank you again. And
Thank you. This was
thanks
fun.
for coming on. All right. Bye.